So again, so my name is Lindsay from the co-op. We're here with Lebanon Feed Supply and the Lebanon landfill. We are recording this, but don't worry, I have Spotlight in my video, and I'll be controlling the when we move around the sections. I'll spotlight different people, so it will never record into your living rooms, kitchens, or wherever you're at. So if you want to turn your cameras on, you can. It will record your voices if you ask a question out loud. You can also write questions into the chat, and we will have time at the end. So all three of us have a little bit of content to get through for you, and so we'll save most of our questions towards the end. You can raise your hand, you can speak out, or write them in the chat, and we'll answer them as we can. So I see we had somebody else chime in, which is great, and hopefully we'll get more people. But we're going to start. So as I said, I'm the culinary instructor for the co-op. I teach our cooking classes. So my part in this program is talking about how to use up food in a way that we don't have as many food scraps. What inspired us to collaborate on this class is, of course, there's a new Vermont law that you can't put food scraps in your trash for a couple of different reasons, and Mark will speak to that, I think, a little bit more as he runs the landfill, but I believe a lot of it was because of landfill reasons. So the first part in composting is important, it's a great step to do, but before we even get there, learning how to use your vegetables up more so you have less scraps. The top of the pyramid, the recycling pyramid, the first part is reduce. And so that's the same here, even in the composting one, is how do we reduce? So I have a box of vegetables here. I went through and we actually donate a lot of sort of not prime produce to Willing Hands, if you're familiar with that nonprofit. It was started by a former co-op employee, and they get a lot of stuff that's a little bit probably picked over. People wouldn't necessarily, it's not the top produce here at the co-op, so, but it's all perfectly good. And in here, a couple of things. So one of the ways to use a full vegetable, here I have a head of broccoli, and did you know that the stalks are perfectly edible? You might want to take a vegetable peeler and peel them down a little bit so you'll have a few peels, but then you can chop up this stalk into smaller pieces and you can add it into your stir fries. You can boil it down. It takes a little bit more cooking than the tender tops here, but it's perfectly edible. You can also, if you wanted to, boil them and then you can mash. Same with cauliflower. The stalks are great. The leaves, if you get the full cauliflower, the leaves that come out, those are edible, and actually they're really crunchy. Just clean them really well, and then they're perfect for dipping in hummus or something because they actually have a lot of good crunch to them. My challenge for you is you're gonna get a lot of information tonight. It's hard to do it all. Don't try to do it all. Pick one thing. Start there. And if you can, challenge yourself. How can I use the whole vegetable? What can I do? So one thing is maybe start to use your broccoli stems, right? Instead of throwing them away. Now, if you did want to compost them, you just figure out you don't like taste or you don't have time to deal with it, that's fine, that's great. You want to chop things down as best you can. I mean, you can throw this whole stalk into your compost. It'll take a lot longer to break down than if you just chop it up into small pieces. So here are some beautiful carrots that I pulled out of the bin. One of them's broken. Now the great thing about these carrots, these tops right here, still edible. These guys are great. They're a little bit just like, a harder stem from parsley or something. They can be a little toothsome. So again, you'd want to chop them up really fine. I'm going to show you a recipe here in just a minute. But these carrots are perfect, and stuff to do with produce that might be a little bit past its prime, like this little squash right here. It's getting a little wrinkly. It might be a little too soft. It won't hold up really well. One of the things you can do is you can grate it, and I will put this, got a bowl here, and I'm just going to grate this guy. And you can make vegetable pancakes. So, you know, you can use the grated parts here into muffins, you know, if you wanted to add some great fiber, or this makes great fritters. So grate up a couple of squash. So I've just got one going right there. And then this is all that I have left. Perfect, small, goes in my compost. I have a beet here that's got a little bit of mold on it. So you can just cut that away, you know? No big deal. Grate it up. Now, of course, this is going to make my fritters bright red because this is a nice red beet. And I'm just doing this into a bowl. You can also take a fermentation class. I'll probably be teaching one in January. I think I saw Gardener Supplies doing one pretty soon. I don't know if I can mention them. They're a good company. They're doing a fermentation class. You can ferment these carrots, grate them up, create a slaw out of them. So right here, just out of a couple vegetables, I've got all of the pulp. I'm just going to move this aside. And if you wanted to make fritters, you'd want to squeeze out any of the juice. The great part about this is this juice that comes out as I squeeze, that can go right in your compost. That's kind of like tea, right? You can also just drink it. I mean, why not? If you have a juicer, for a lot of people who have juicers, Google juicer pulp. I'll show you a couple recipes that I have. Fritters or burgers. You can make great things out of the pulp. But here I've got this juice I could save. But then I have this beautiful pulp that's left. In it, I would mix an egg, maybe some spices. If you have a little bit of old bread, right, you could crumble that up. Toast it would probably be even better. I'm just going to crumble it up and put it in. And then, you know, use an egg or two as a binder. Eggshells, if you wash them, make a great, and kind of break them up. I usually save them in a jar. They are really good for your garden to discourage slugs. So I just kind of mix those right into the soil. But here I'm starting to have a vegetable pulp. I'll bind it together, a little bit of flour, a little bit of egg, and I can make fritters out of it. And I haven't wasted really any of the vegetable. My other favorite thing to do, and it's a lot of people will say pesto. I actually like to make an herb mixture or use lots of greens. So I often will end up with lots of different kinds of greens in my refrigerator. And then there's just a point where I can't get to them all. And so I throw them all in my food processor. And that's what I'm going to do here. I'm going to throw these guys in my food processor. I have some, these are some little endives that I salvaged. These are some collard greens. You'd want to really make sure that they were washed well. But, you know, with things like collard greens and kale, you can use the stalks. I'm going to give these guys a really quick little rinse. I'm going to throw all this stuff into my, I'm going to chop them up, the stalks and everything. The collards that we get here aren't as dirty. When I lived in the South, you had to wash them and wash them and wash them and wash them. But depending where you are, you want to just the way that they grow. They like the sandy soil. So I just give them a chop. They're going to go into my food processor. This is my leftover salad from my today's lunch. I've eaten most of the good stuff out of it. There's probably a couple of other things hanging around. That's all right. It's going to go into my food processor. It may seem crazy, but I promise you, it works out really good. I've got a few other random pieces of lettuce. It always happens to me. I buy like 3 or 4 heads of stuff for different kinds, and then I have too much. I have this huge processor filled with greens. It's going to blend down to just about nothing. I have all these herbs. Basil, you kind of like, this is pretty spent. The tender stalks, you can throw right on in there. So as many herbs as you can. If they're really woody stalks, if they're really woody, they tend to be kind of bitter. I use those for flavor sometimes, but in this case, you know, I've got a couple of stalks that are left over. I'm gonna put that right in my food processor. Same with any of the soft herbs like parsley, cilantro, the stems are perfectly edible. You know, we often, you know, they say, you know, pick the leaves, but these stems are just as good. So I'm gonna throw those in my food processor. All right, I have all this going. I wanna add a few things for flavor. So I'm gonna add in some garlic. You could throw in some raw ginger. I like garlic. So I'm gonna throw in like a handful of cloves. I'm gonna add in just the tiniest bit of oil. Once I add this oil, you know, this isn't something that I would want to then, you know, I'm trying to make something that I will use. If you wanted to turn this into a pesto, you would add some cheese, some nuts. But here I'm just gonna process this up really quickly. It's gonna go real fast. I'll move my camera here so you can see it closer. I'm gonna just get in here and smash things down and around real quick. Oh my goodness, come on. Go right back on, turn it on. All right. I added barely any oil to this. I didn't add a lot of liquid. You can add a bit more, it's a great preservative. But what I can do now with this, this beautiful herb spread, you can see that? It's got some garlic in there. You could add some salt, that would help. But a lot of times I'll take something like this, and I'm gonna switch my camera view here again real quick for you. And then I might mix it in with some yogurt. This is how I love to make salad dressings. You know, this herb mixture, throw it in anything, right? Throw it in with some eggs, and then you've got a beautiful omelet. Maybe I'll take it with, I've got some sheep's milk yogurt right here. I throw in a bunch of this herbs. I might thin it out with, right there, I've got a dip. I can thin it out with some buttermilk or something like that. And I've got dressing. Probably gonna need some salt for sure. And probably a little pepper, but this is one of my favorite ways, and I make a lot of you know, really rich herb dressings this way. I'm gonna go ahead and taste it. All right. Those are some really quick and easy ways. One other thing I'm going to touch before I'm going to turn it over, this is what you're saying, it's going to go fast, is one of the things that you can't put in your compost really easily is citrus. So I highly recommend whenever you have citrus, first of all, get that zest off of there. That's product. When you buy a lemon, this is a Meyer lemon, or even a grapefruit, you know, this zest, this rind on the outside, that's gold. You can save lemon zest in a small container. So just, you know, have a little jar. It'll last in your refrigerator for up to 2 weeks. Perfectly fine. You can also dry it in your oven. You can also take the peel, right, and candy it. So dip it in some, make a simple syrup. Or I was thinking about taking apples and, or citrus and making my own vinegar with it. To make your own vinegar, you know, you can just Google it. There's lots of different resources out there. One resource I was looking at recently was, you said that you needed wine yeast, but you don't. You can just use some apple cider vinegar that has some, like, unfiltered. You know, use a good unfiltered apple cider vinegar and get some of this good stuff at the bottom. Or just sugar and water and allow the fermentation process to happen. But look that up. Last but not least, things like cheeses. Look up a recipe called fromage fort from Jacques Pepin. They take all these little ends of cheeses. We're gonna get into holiday season, or, you know, it got away from you. You can take all of these, stick them in your freezer, save your Parmesan rinds, throw this in when you're making stock or making soup. You can fish it out. It adds a ton of flavor. But you can also save all your little bits of cheeses, all different kinds. You throw it into a blender with some garlic and some white wine, and all of a sudden you have this amazing out-of-the-world cheese spread called fromage fort. That's it for me. I'm going to pass the baton right now over to our team at the West Leb Feed and Supply. You guys will have to unmute yourselves, but I'm going to spotlight their video. So I don't think I can unmute you.
Hey guys.
There you go.
Thanks, Lindsay.
Yeah.
Definitely use those cooking tips. I'm Mike at West Lebanon Feed Supply. I just wanted to show you guys some of the products we have to help you kind of in your composting journey. Sort of start out with the kitchen stuff, since that's where we just left off with Lindsay. We do have some compost caddies. We've got this guy, which is plastic. Comes with a charcoal filter on the inside. We do also have the replacement filters for that. Good thing to keep, under your cabinet or in your pantry. And then we do have this ceramic one also, which does have the filters as well. A little bit fancier. So that would be an option for those. We also have biodegradable liners for both of these. These are certified for use in home bins, so these should be fine to use and put in bins or a compost pile if you have them. So we do have those. I was going to say, as far as outdoor composters, we have a couple different options. We do have this Tierra Durco. It's a 50-gallon tumbler. It is on a rack, so you can move it wherever you want, which is very helpful. It just has a locking lid. I don't know if Dawn can see in there or not, but pretty good capacity. It's got a steel frame, and it does have the ability to rotate, so you can lock it in place wherever you want. But just the ability to move it around your yard wherever you like is very helpful. This kind of on the opposite end of things is like the standard dome style composter. It just has the removable lid, which also does lock. And that's the exit chute at the bottom there, where your good compost would come out. As far as kind of the option for people with less space, maybe renting somewhere. This is almost like a spring-loaded, they call it a roll mix composter, much less expensive, and you just kind of fill it up and add water and kind of turn it as you go, but it's very easy to tuck it away somewhere so you don't have one of these kind of taking up a bunch of space. As far as tools and aerating your compost, we do have options like this compost aerator, which is pretty good size for something like this or that. If you have an outdoor pile, we do have pitchforks, more sizes, more varieties than this on hand, also shovels, but something that you can really just get in there and turn stuff over. So those would be some options for that. I guess we also have this auger, which is actually a planting auger. You could potentially attach to a drill and use that for turning your compost. Some other stuff, Compost Starter, which you would add either to your pile or either of these bins in certain layers. It just helps things kind of get going, so you have an easier time with that. As far as the preserving things side of things, just a quick mention, we do have vacuum sealers on hand and bags, which are great for just making sure, you get all the air sucked out of everything. So if you put it in the freezer, it doesn't get freezer burn. You can really make things last a lot longer using those. And we do now carry freeze dryers as well, which are right over here. Kind of a lot to get into, but they are pretty awesome. We have one on hand that we've used a bunch of times. We have a couple on order. They'll be coming in soon, but we do have the ability to order them. It's a pretty neat product to have in your house. I feel like that's probably it as far as what we have on hand for.
You can always order stuff.
Oh yeah. If you know you're looking for something that we don't have, we can definitely order it. We're always looking to add to our composting kind of library of products that we have. There's a lot of stuff out there, but more often than not, we can get something that you're looking for that's not here. So, what's that?
We're going to hand it over to Mark.
Oh, nice. Yeah. So that's going to be it for my part. Mark, I think he's going to take over now. We look forward to hear what he has to say.
All right, thank you. Appreciate it. Thanks, Mike and Don over at Lebanon Feed Supply. Thanks, Lindsay. So what I'm going to talk about is kind of the meat and potatoes of composting. I apologize if the sound quality is poor. I'm in the maintenance garage at the landfill, and the signal is pretty bad. So I'm hoping that we're going to do okay. I think it's important to note that composting is something that happens every day in the forest. It's really not a complicated process. It is something that just happens naturally. If you're going to start composting, it's important before you get started to really think about what it is that you're trying to accomplish. There's really two basic options when you're composting. One is you're composting to produce a product for your garden. If that's the case, that changes the way that you're going to look at your feedstocks, how you're going to manage that pile. And I can get into that a little bit later. The second option, and in all honesty, this is the option that I work on, is composting to reduce waste. So the bin that I use at home is pretty low maintenance, and all I'm doing is composting to eliminate waste that's going into the landfill. I've actually not harvested any of the compost out of our bin, and we've been composting for about 10 years at our location at where I live. So you don't have to use it in the garden. You could just do it to reduce your waste. I know there's some that do use it in the garden, and that's great. But those are your two basic options. So when we're talking about composting, a lot of folks just think, well, I'm going to take my food scraps and just throw it in a pile, and then I'll have compost. What you end up having is a bad odor. So food scraps that you can include in your compost pile are things like fruits and vegetables, eggshells, coffee grounds, filters, really anything that Lindsay was talking about as well, that you're going to generate in the kitchen. Tea bags, paper towels and napkins are okay. I actually brought my compost bin from home. So here's a paper towel we used at my house. Yes, there's flowers on it. That's okay. It's not a problem. So that is compostable. What's important is that we also include things like leaf and yard waste. Leaves and grass clippings from your yard is critical for that compost to be right. It's also important to think about some of the things that we're not going to include in our backyard compost bin. There are other options that allow you to compost some of these items, but we're focusing on the backyard bin at this point. So things not to include in your bin in the backyard would be things like meat, fish, and dairy, milk and cheese, oils, and some compostable products are just difficult to compost in the backyard because you're not getting temperatures hot enough. We have a large compost pile here at the Lebanon Solid Waste facility where we have really hot temperatures. So we do compost carcasses and compostable products easily because of our temperatures. So this is a great time of year to start a bin, and a lot of folks are wondering, how do I get started? So I have our bin here, which is made out of 3 pallets, some chicken wire, and wood that we found around the facility. So we just put this together for demonstration purposes, but it foots the bill. Any of the bins that were mentioned earlier, it's the same concept that you need to talk about as far as recipe development. So some of the first things you do is you need some small sticks and twigs. Chips, these are all the stuff I got. So those go on the bottom of your bin, and that's just to allow air to go from underneath, because it's a convection type heat that comes up underneath your pile and will heat up through. So it's important that you have sticks or wood chips. I found it. This is a sunflower seed root ball. That'll make some great aeration underneath, and the root ball is going to provide some some nutrients as well as other some microorganisms in there as well to get things jump started. Am I back?
So it looks like, oh, there we go. You back?
Am I back?
Yep,
Am I back, Lindsay?
you're back. There we go.
All right, sorry about that. All right, so we're back. So after you put the sticks in, I just have some leaves here. So then you just put in some leaves. As far as basic tools, pitchfork, spade, shovel. The tool of choice at my compost bin is my grandfather's potato rake. Just works really well for me. So it allows me to put the material on the bin. After that, we're going to take a little food waste, which again, I brought from home, and it's just some squash, some bread, and coffee grounds. And yes, this is my food waste bin that I keep under my sink. Everybody confuses this once for Cascade pods, and then they realize it's not Cascade pods. So after you've got food waste in, every time you add food waste, you need to add more yard waste. And that's it. So every time you add food waste to your bin, it's important that you add yard waste on top. It's a lot like creating a lasagna. So you've got yard waste on the bottom to start with some sticks. Then you put in some food waste. Then you put in some more yard waste on top of that. So the next time you come down and you've got, so this is my food waste bin here at work. You guys take a shovel or in. And then add more leaf and yard waste on top of that. So it's, and again, the same concept exists for the bins that were presented earlier at West Lebanon Feed Supply. There's a number of questions that come along with this. I'm simplifying only because we've got 15 minutes. So I think what's important is to recognize that leaf and yard waste is important. You need to have at least, it's a 1 to 3 ratio. So 1 part food waste, 3 parts leaf and yard waste. Leaves are really important. If all you're adding is green grass, you're going to have odor problems in the middle of the summer. So in the fall, it's great to set a pile of leaves, to one side of your bin, just so you can add it as you're adding food, just to keep some of your odors down. Some people ask, what about stove ash? We're going into winter. Can I add my stove ash to my compost pile? And yes, you can, but the problem with stove ash is the pH ends up killing a lot of the microorganisms in the pile. So it's not always a great idea to add to your compost pile. And Lindsay mentioned earlier, orange peels. Are orange peels bad? If you're eating a lot of oranges, maybe it's bad, but it's really not a problem for a regular compost bin. Some folks ask, how often should I turn it? And maybe once a week. But one of the things that I do is if I know it's going to rain, like today, I'll go out with a shovel or the potato rake and just open up a hole in the pile and allow the water to just kind of pool up in the middle of the pile, and then it percolates down through. What do I do if my pile stinks? if your pile stinks, then it needs more yard waste. That's usually the problem. Make sure you're not adding things like cat or dog feces. That can add to your odor problems. And if you're adding meat or dairy, chances are that stuff is rotting and just creating odors. So add some leaves or sawdust, something along those lines, turn the pile, and the odor problem should go away within a day. So I've had a lot of questions about compostable plastics. So we do manage those here. So this is a compostable plastic fork. I pulled these right out of our compost piles down back. We've got compostable bags and then compostable coffee cups. So as you can see, they're already on their way to being composted. So can I put those in my backyard compost bin? A few here and there might not be a problem. Chances are something like a fork is not going to break down in your compost pile. You're just not going to get temperatures hot enough. How long does it take until I can get a usable product? I would say it's going to take you at least a year. And many times what you do is you end up having 2, sometimes 3 bins like this side by side. And as you fill one, the other one is just sitting curing. And then so you're using them every season. And what does it look like when it's done? So this is just some of our compost here from our compost area here at Lebanon. We do use this here on site as erosion control, but it basically is, it can't look like what you started with. So this is just, black soil. That's all it is. And this is food waste and yard waste. That's our recipe here. So one thing that I thought of this morning is, so I got Lindsay and Dawn some flowers. These are a little wilty though. Some folks ask, well, what about the flowers that I get at the grocery store? Can I throw those in my compost bin? I got these at Edgewater Farm. So these are not, these don't have the pesticides and fungicides and things like that that the grocery store flowers contain to make the long trips. So these are rotting and wilting. The ones in the grocery stores take a lot longer, and it's because there's a lot of chemicals in those flowers. So I would caution you about putting those in your compost bin. But it's your choice. If it's a couple flowers, it won't be that big a deal. But just think about those types of issues. That where did your produce come from, and what does it contain? So that's my speedy compost 101 in your backyard.
Awesome. Thanks, Mark. So he brought up a couple of things, and then I see we have a question. So if anybody else has one, raise your hand, or and I'll. But he brought up a story that reminded me. So back when my dog, who's a hound dog, was still alive, and we had just moved up here, my neighbor said, I'm starting a compost pile, and he won't get into it. And I was like, well, don't throw meat and cheese in there. Because actually when we had lived on a chicken farm, the chicken farmer, chickens die. And she kept throwing the chickens in the compost pile, and he kept getting them out and eating them. And she was like, he's eating the chickens. And I'm like, stop putting them in the compost pile. So anyways, my dog, the Great Hunter, he had a good kill list. But all of a sudden he was like coming home with like half a bagel. One day he had like, part of a baguette. I couldn't figure out where he's getting all this bread from, and it was from my neighbor's compost pile. So just as the foods that you're putting in there, you either got to break them up really well, or mix them in, because wild animals will get in there, or dogs. So just to show you, so here is, I've got 2 containers, a giant one I added all the yogurt, and this will ripen, so it's actually nice, but I've got lots of garlic in there. I make lots of interesting mixtures, so one thing you do is you like to, and I use all sorts of jars, so label it. But this is sort of like today's salad, and it'll now be on salad dressing for tomorrow's salad, so it's a little meta that way. All right, we do have a question for Mark, I think, is how do you prevent roots growing up into the compost?
So turning is going to prevent those roots for sure. You're creating a very nutrient-rich environment, so there will be roots that come up in. Make sure where you're putting your compost bin also, maybe you want to put some sand down first, just to allow for some drainage, and stuff doesn't grow all that great in sand anyways. But if you're turning it regularly, it'll reduce the amount of roots that are in your bin.
Great. Here's another question. What to do when it's cold outside, or there's I'm going to add to that, 6 feet of snow?
Okay, so the compost process doesn't generally work at those temperatures, particularly in your backyard. We're able to do that here at the facility, and we will be offering a food scrap drop-off starting in January for households. So for those winter months, you could bring it here starting in January. The other thing my mother-in-law used to do is she actually used to have a 5-gallon pail in her chest freezer, and she would literally freeze her food scraps all winter. And then in the spring, she would just put them out in her compost bin. So in the winter, it's just not going to happen. You can try to put a shovel into your pile, and if anybody who's tried this will know that it doesn't go very far. Usually you're hitting an ice block. So winter backyard composting is not generally something that works well.
I think there's also a couple of other companies that are springing up around the area that are doing some larger volume composting. So I know there's one that the pickup and drop off is here, or at least the lid transfer. I don't know. People come in and get a new lid and new bags. So is there any other questions that we do? We've got a few minutes here. All right, sounds good. I guess the first part of the pyramid, not paradigm, the schematic is to reduce. So try to think of the ways. Here's my challenge for you from my standpoint is how can you reduce your food scraps? How can you use the whole vegetable and really use it well? You're paying for that product. Hopefully you're buying good local vegetables as much as you can. And so really using it all up versus having a ton of food scraps. And then once you are, there's lots of options and really turning it in. We're trying to reduce waste. Landfills only go so long and they fill up. And so, the more stuff we put in them, they don't go anywhere. It just fills up. So you can make soil for your garden, or at least just reduce the amount of waste that goes into the landfill. Anything else to add from West Lebanon Feed Supply or from Mark?
We did a study recently and found that Upper Valley residents are generating between 20 and 50% of their waste as food scraps. So using some of the techniques that Lindsay talked about earlier helps reduce your overall waste. And some of the participants discovered that. They changed their purchasing practices. They used some of the tools that Mike mentioned earlier about bagging and freezing some of their leftovers. And so the amount of food waste that they actually were generating considerably dropped. But it is amazing just how much we're throwing away that has value. So absolutely start thinking about what it is you're doing with your food scraps.
All right, well, I think that does it for us tonight. Thank you all so much for joining us. We really appreciate it. We'd love to hear from you and see what stuck out to you, what tidbits you took away, and hopefully kind of where you go with your own composting. So reach out to any one of us at West Lebanon Feed Supply here at the co-op or at the landfill and let us know. Then we can build more of these programs. So thank you all very much. And have a great evening. Stay dry. Stay warm.